Warm greetings to both the attendees and our honorable speaker from the American University of Beirut AUB campus here in Beirut, Lebanon. Today, as it has always been for almost 6 years, the Transformative Education TRED family is here to welcome you with another installment in our Mentoring Talk series. By changing the way students feel and think about failure, these mentoring talks encourage the attendees to embrace every step of their long journey through its ups and downs. Since 2016, we have hosted Nobel laureates, professors, TV anchors, comedians, actors, and others. We do this for the attendees to get a glimpse of how failure can be turned into success. Our esteemed guests have shared with us the ways in which they, through conquering their life circumstances, conquered their self-doubt in the process. In a similar fashion, the TRED team right here at AUB persevered despite the setbacks due to COVID and many other conditions right here in Lebanon, and continued to provide the mentoring talks virtually, face-to-face, or via WebEx. The message from these mentoring talks remain the same: explore, dream, discover. Let us welcome then today's distinguished speaker, Professor Hashem Pesaran, an emeritus professor of economics at the University of Cambridge, the John Elliot Distinguished Chair in Economics at the University of Southern California, and a Professorial Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge. Professor Pesaran is also a Fellow of the British Academy, a Fellow of the Econometric Society, and a Fellow of the Journal of Econometrics. Professor Pesaran is the founding editor of the Journal of Applied Econometrics and a co-developer of Microfit, an econometric software package published by Oxford University Press. Professor Pesaran was born in Shiraz, Iran. He received his school diploma from the Nemazi School in Shiraz and left to England to further his studies through a scholarship. He received his Bachelor of Science first-class honors in economics, mathematics, and statistics from the University of Salford, England, and his PhD in economics from Cambridge University. Professor Pesaran has over 200 publications in leading scientific journals and has edited volumes in the areas of econometrics, empirical finance, and macroeconomics. And he is an expert in the economics of oil and the Middle East. He received a long list of honors and accolades. Professor Pesaran has been repeatedly nominated for the Nobel Prize in Economics. He was awarded honorary doctorates from the University of Salford in 1993, the University of Goethe Frankfurt in 2008, Maastricht University in 2013, and the University of Economics Prague in 2016. He received the 1990 George Sell Prize from the Institute of Petroleum, London. Professor Pesaran has been a member of the Board of Trustees of the Economic Research Forum for many countries and has served as a member of the World Bank's Council of Advisors for the Middle East and North Africa. Although his illustrious record may seem intimidating, the point of this mentoring talk is to bring our idols down to earth and realize that their achievements are within your reach as well. Without further ado, let's hear Professor Pesaran's mentoring talk entitled "Take Questions Seriously. All learning and scientific discoveries begin with questions." Professor Pesaran, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very privileged to have this chance to share with you my reflections on the challenges I've faced and the opportunities I have been offered, both as a civil servant in Iran before the revolution, which those of you who don't remember, February 1979, and as an academic and consultant, as was mentioned, to a number of international agencies when I returned to Cambridge towards the end of 1978, just before the revolution. But first, I would like to thank Dr. Bilal Kaafarani for organizing this event, and also I would like to thank Dr. Leila Dagar, which I know very well, a member of the your university, who has introduced me to the university more recently. But let me tell you that I have a very nostalgic view of Beirut, because the first time I came to Beirut, very short visit, was just before the civil war in 1975, and I remember the Beirut that many of you as youngsters haven't seen, which was a beautiful city, all these beautiful flowers everywhere, and lovely copper beaches. So I have a very soft spot for your part of the world, especially coming from Iran. Now, but I would like to start with a very brief account of a more personal aspects of my education in Iran, because I want to relate to your experiences rather than just like a CV type where I went, but I just want to know how I didn't come from very privileged society, although I was brought up in a privileged family, a very loving family, so which was often as important. Obviously, the schooling I went was very ordinary, and the education that we had, although very well done, it didn't cover all the areas that scientifically were important to my future development. As was pointed out, I was born in Shiraz, but I like to point out that Shiraz is known as a city of flowers, roses, poets, and nightingales. I'm going to end with one of the poems by Saadi, who is a very famous poet, and together with Hafiz are the most famous members of the Shiraz, which we are proud to relate to. The school I went to, the focus was on mathematics and physics and literature. There were not much training in social sciences, which is a subject which I'm at the moment interested in and working on. And they didn't even offer any course in economics. So that's important, because I never thought I would become an economist. We didn't know what it was until I went to England on a scholarship. But I was very interested in history, and even organized historical plays for local radio. I was so interested in Genghis Khan, because, as you know, he conquered. It was more than anybody else in the world, and held it for 250 years through his children. And they played a very important role in the Middle East. And therefore, I followed quite closely some of historical developments. And I recommend, one of the things I would recommend, that no matter what subject area you take, always put it in the context of the history. History is critical. And sometimes the way we learn history in a school is basically chronological for our own area. By that I mean you go through the people who ruled your country or influenced your country and your region in a chronological way without realizing what's happening to the rest of the world at the same time. So I think you should look at the history, not only what's happening to you, but what's happening to the rest of the world at the same time as you are looking at your own history. And that's very difficult to do, but I think it's most rewarding. For example, I was interested to know when Iran had into wars with Russia, what was happening in Europe, what was new development happening. So when Newton was developing his ideas based on gravity, what were Iranian doing? So basically, I think this has helped me to put in context my own work and also my understanding of the world we live in. I was fortunate to have really good teachers and fellow students. I find that most inspiring is students help you more than your teachers. So try to learn from each other. That is, I think, is most important. And I'm also learning from my students through training them, realize my own deficiencies, my own shortcomings. And that because if you, as somebody said, if you explain a phenomenon and people don't understand it, whose fault is it? Is it their fault or is it your fault? So you should always say, I could do better in that respect. And also during the summers, as you know, it's hot weather. I really disliked afternoon siestas. As a young boy, I remember that. But that was a bonus. I read many books, not realizing that I was reading Farsi translation of classics from French, English, and Russian. It's only when I came to Europe, I realized what I was reading was important literature from Victor Hugo, Alexander Dumas, even Arsène Lupin. So as I was just saying, basically that I'll talk about as my schooling and the fact that despite the fact we had not a very advanced school, but we had great opportunities still to learn, and we actually learned from each other, and that was very important. And I think that's one of the lessons I learned, that your co-students could play a very important role in your advancement, and I would not underestimate that. When I finished my schooling, the question was, how did I end up being an economist? I mean, as I said, we didn't learn economics in Iran. So when I finished the schooling, it was in 1964, I had a choice between becoming a civil engineer going to Tehran University or an oil engineer in Abadan. In fact, I went to Abadan, which is a city in south of Iran, which housed the largest oil refinery in the world, 750,000 barrels a day. Unfortunately, after Iran-Iraq war, it just was out of commission and is not back to its level that it used to be at the moment. But then I also got a scholarship from Central Bank to become a chartered accountant. So there was a choice of being an engineer and a chartered accountant, a very contrasting choice. And I think I also obtained a full scholarship from American University of Beirut, believe it or not, because those days we applied. My cousin was already as a AUB and recommended to me to apply, and I got the scholarship. So I could have ended up being educated in AUB, believe it or not. That's the truth. It's not. I'm not making it up. It's just that's how it was. So basically. In a way, the reason why we end up going to England is the lure of being England, not because we wanted to be chartered accountant. Central Bank of Iran wanted to expand in that area. So we end up going to, first we went to Manchester, and we had to get A levels, you know, what's called the General Certificate of Education Advanced Level in England, because they didn't recognize our diploma from Iran. So a lot of people complain to me that when they come abroad, they don't recognize. I said, look, we were all subject to it. Somehow you have to deal with the challenge that when you're moving from one part of the world to another, you need to get, you know, new qualifications. And we were lucky, we did the A levels in 5 months. We were supposed to take 2 years, but we were so well educated in the areas that we were working with. And then one of the things, again, we learned that we were 9 of us from all getting a scholarship from Iran, and it was like home to home. Basically, the class were all Iranians. We spoke to each other in Farsi, which wasn't very good, but nevertheless, we helped each other to in isolation. When you are 17 years old and you are brought from Shiraz for the first time abroad and put in Manchester, you know, is the contrast couldn't be huger. In those days, there were not many people moving from Iran to the rest of the world. So we were a novelty in Manchester, which was good in some way. We got a lot of attention. So basically, when we finished the A level too quickly, they didn't know what to do with us. So it was lucky, a new university was being formed called Salford next to Manchester, which wanted to accept students. So they accepted all of us. So again, we went to the same class together. So that was helpful to me. because we never felt lonely. We never felt isolated the way you could become when you are studying by yourself or a foreign country. I really appreciate the problem people have, especially nowadays with COVID, with being isolated. I think is a real challenge. And my view is that don't worry, you will get over it. This thing happened. As I explained, I went through a revolution. I moved the country. You somehow become stronger as a result of all this development. But as luck had it, the degree we were offered to go in Salford was a joint degree in mathematics, statistics, and economics. It was the first of its kind in whole Europe. Remember, we talked about 1960s, 64, 65, when I started doing my undergraduate. So it's a very long time ago. So I was very fortunate, and quite by luck, that I was being trained in the three elements of econometrics, which is mathematics, statistics, and the economics itself. And I found the maths very easy because we had already done a lot of mathematical preparation in Iran, which allowed us to focus on the statistics and economics, which I didn't know anything about. And that was really an important part of my training. So it often is like a building block of what you do. And what happened then, I got interested in questions then. So if I'm going to ask the right question and then have answering the question become important. Let's start with the first question, which I faced when I was studying. I was very intrigued by why economies go up and down, what we call it business cycle, why there are recession and expansion. And still is a big issue. I mean, we don't really understand it very well. So that was the first question I needed to answer. And I looked at the various models at the time, even when I was second year undergraduate, and I wasn't very happy about many of these models. Still, they are around. It's basically, this is all because of shocks. So basically, the world is going up and down because you have these cumulative shocks happening, like the COVID shock or the blow up of, so there is an earthquake or there are weather changes, which are true. A lot of people think is that just the economies are really stable and everything is perfectly okay, except for the shocks. I never believed that, and I still don't. And there was a work done by Hicks, which got a Nobel Prize later on, which tried to say, no, actually it's the role of the government, which helps the economies to recover from some big shocks. So without the government, it's not clear that these economies would survive. So the role of government was played very important sort of role itself in my understanding. I realized that while there is true that markets are important and capitalism has been very successful, but I realized that without some kind of if you like, overseeing from the government or through central banks or through other policies, you couldn't really maintain it. So that became very important also in my future understanding. So the first question really was important to make me believe that those people who thought, like Friedman and others, that you should not intervene in the market at all, they were really theoretical. In practice, that doesn't seem to have been the case. So then the question was, when I finished my degree, that would I become chartered accountant? Most of my, almost everybody which I were a scholarship, they went to do accounting by training in some accounting companies. But because I was only one of them which got first class honors, and also I got admission to all sorts of universities, Cambridge, Oxford. I remember there were, I got many American universities. So I had a choice actually between going to Cambridge or Berkeley, because Cambridge I thought is a very important place, especially at the time. Keynes was there. There were a lot of models of economy which was aligned with my view that the intervention by government in some form or another is important. But I could have gone to Berkeley, and that was exciting times. Remember, there were all these demonstrations against the Vietnam War in America, and Berkeley campus played a very important role in these developments. I was very much attracted, but as it was, My girlfriend, which is now have been my wife for the last more than 50 years, she happened to live near Cambridge. And I tell people the choices we make is not necessarily based only on academic reasons. And then I decided to go to Cambridge simply because of her, and was lucky that the central bank had enough insight. I remember the governor I got to know very well later agreed for me to stay in England and do my PhD in Cambridge. But I ended up in Harvard for a year because I realized when I arrived in Cambridge that basically they didn't have the training. Those days when you did a PhD, they said, oh, go and do your PhD. Nobody trained you. There were no classes. I felt this is not necessary. So that's what I'm saying. You have to take things to your hand. If you find there's some deficiency in your system of education or where you're working or the courses you're doing, try to compensate for it. It's okay to complain, but does not help you in the long run. So you have to compensate for it. You have to find a way to deal with the problem. So what did I do? I found a loophole in Cambridge University regulation that out of the 3 years which I had to do my PhD, those that we do 3 years of PhD. Nowadays, my students, when they do 5 years, they want another year. Some of them do 7 years. The world has changed. We had 3 years. So they allowed me to spend 1 year with any accredited university. So I wrote to Harvard, MIT, and again, Harvard, Grillicus, who was very eminent economist at the time there, he wrote back to me almost 2 weeks later, said, you're welcome we would love to have you here. So I spent 1 year in Harvard as a visiting student, went to classes, and then got to know a lot of economists in the US, which I still have known, and maybe out of 10, I know 7 of them have already got Nobel Prize. So that's how it is. So therefore, that was a key decision that I compensated for it. And actually, Ron Smith, who was one of my main co-authors, who told me he is going to MIT as well, because he was also felt that Cambridge doesn't offer the courses we needed. So that's another lesson I learned, that you talk to your friends, they tell you information, then act on the information. And that was very important. And then when basically when I went to Cambridge, initially I wasn't in Trinity College. I was in Sydney Sussex College, and that was my first college. But I want to share you a picture of Trinity College, just to remind you why I was so attracted and stayed there despite all of the incentive to go elsewhere. So let's just see. I'm now learning how to share this screen. So this is you can see this is now the picture is a courtyard I see when I see it's taken from a picture taken from my office. I've been still they kept my office, which is amazing. I've been there 10 years now, professor at USC, but I go there. I'm planning to go back in May. So that is why I felt that when I was a refugee from Iran, later on, that was like being a replacement for me, as a sense that you have to have a home, you have to have a connection, you have to have a belonging. In order to create things, in order to develop ideas, you really need a sense of belonging, because it needs a huge commitment. And that Trinity played a very important role in my basically way I live. So another thing is I wanted to show you that when I was in Cambridge, we didn't just study. Let me just show you this picture. So basically, in a way, I loved games. And I found that a sport is so important in development of one's, not only physique, mind as well. As I say, you need both aspects of your life, balance. And I don't know whether you know who the guy with the mustache is me in the photograph. I was fortunate enough to be a good basketball player, and I played when I was in Iran, presented my province Fars, and also played in Salford. And then when I was in Cambridge, I played. My only regret is we played. I was there 3 years in the team. Every year we lost to Oxford, which is called varsity. Because Oxford attracted all these fantastic Americans, which they played very good basketball. And I think we had only one American, number 13 here, and the rest were from all over the world, not America. So we lost to America. So that's the only regret I have. We never won against the Oxford, which has been always an important thing. So basically now, later on, what another thing which was important is that meeting colleagues while you're doing your PhD or you're doing a graduate work course or undergraduate, and keeping a connection with them. I'm sure most of you do that. Now, I'm going to show you this last picture before me moving on. And that is when the first conference I went, when I'm finishing my PhD. So this is a picture that we took when I went to Budapest. It was the first meeting of Econometric Society I went in Budapest in 1972. That was when I finished my PhD, and I then presented my work, which is very important. So therefore, another thing is important for your career to always be networking and connecting. I'm getting old. I don't like networking because it's too much trouble, but I would recommend it. And I think this period that we have been going through has been really difficult for young people, because especially, and I hope that things get better and you can move back. So let me tell you who these people are. They were all in Cambridge. We were together, so we took this picture. The guy on the left here is Mervyn King, who became the governor of Central Bank of England. Terry Barker developed Cambridge Econometrics, a major consulting company which still operates. That's me, the third from the, if you don't recognize it. And this is the big chap here is Angus Deaton, who got a Nobel Prize a few years ago, who was my co-author, and I sort of worked with him earlier on. So basically, this connection remained, and obviously, everyone did their own thing, but nevertheless, that was important to be able to basically have a network. Now, I'm going now to go back and ask what about the question I was interested in, and how asking the right question was important. So when I finished my degree in Cambridge, you know, I wrote a good thesis, basically, and got a lot of attention. So I got offer of jobs from LSE, London School of Economics, Oxford, and Cambridge. And I was also a junior research officer in Department of Applied Economics while I was doing my PhD. So I was really fortunate that my work was, you know, was attended to, because sometimes you work and nobody knows what you're doing. So a lot of that's happened. So it's important that your work be known, but you have to have luck. So when I was obviously tempted to stay back in England, but no, I decided I need to go back to Iran, not because I had a scholarship. People in England offered to actually compensate for so I can stay behind. But I remember even my wife was pregnant over our first child. I was so nationalistic in my mind that I said, I need to go back to Iran and our child be born in Iran. So that's what we did. So at the same time, a lot of Iranians would come to England to have their baby born in England, so their baby became English. I did the opposite. So I'm very proud of that, because my son, Bijan, who is now a major professor in neurologist in New York University, he's now got a big offer. He's going to Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania. And he is very proud, because whenever anybody asks him, he has to say he's Iranian, not that he was born in England. And I think this is a key feature which I did. I make a big decision. Everybody told me, why are you doing this? Why are you sending your wife? I had to fly her to Iran when she's pregnant, because I had to go after, because she had to go, otherwise it would be too late. They said, why are you doing it? I said, no, I make a decision because I believe that my destiny is in Iran. So that is why I went back. And if it weren't for revolution, I wouldn't be talking to you as an academic, for sure. Okay, so when I went back to Iran, I went back to Bank Markazi, Central Bank of Iran. They didn't know what to do with me. That was good, because they left me alone for about, because I was too technical for them. They didn't understand what I've done. So basically they left me alone. And I went to talk to people about what data they have. And I found out all this data available on household expenditure. And I collected all the data I understood the computer programs better than them. So I collected the data and constructed sort of a time series data, which I was expert in, about income distribution. And that was the question. I wanted to know what's happening to income distribution. Everybody's saying Iran doing great. Remember, I went back in 1973, and it was when the oil prices quadrupled, 73, 74. Iran felt that they are doing great. And I was interested more about whether this income we are getting is shared equally among the people. And that was a question I was interested in. And that was the question which also got me into trouble. So sometimes when you ask a question which you interest you, you may get into trouble. And I did, as a young man, I didn't really worry. I didn't even think about it, honest to God. I just thought I need to do that. So I wrote an article about income distribution and its trend in Iran. And that was the first article I wrote about Iran. And I showed systematically, using quite complicated techniques and analysis, that distribution has been deteriorating. Then I went to conferences, presented it. Nothing happened, everything was fine. But then when I tried to publish it, I had to get permission from the governor of central bank, who I didn't know. I was a lonely employer of the bank. Nobody knew who I was. So I wrote to him, excuse me, could you give me a permission to publish this article? And I got this message back, which is, I learned that is like a code word for no. Basically said, let's discuss it. So all this bureaucracy, when they want not to do something, they say, let's have a meeting, let's have a discussion. I didn't know. I went up and he told me, he looked at me, said who you are, and I explained to him. He said, do you want Sabak? Sabak was the secret police in Iran, which was very feared at the time. Those of you probably remember or you know about it. He said, do you want Sabak to come and take the frame of the windows from the bank markets of Iran? It's like a frame that you can't do that. So basically, I was censored the first time as an academic. I was very upset about it, but that's life. So then I realized that what do I do? Would I not work in this area? I did continue. I decided they cannot stop me. And then I wrote a follow-up article, which was then published. And so therefore, another lesson I have is that if you're convinced that something is important, and there is a cost also associated with what you do, you should not just let people dominate what you're doing, in my opinion. Don't worry. If you do everything correctly, not be propaganda or be political, but use out the data. You say, look, this is what I've done. That's what the point of science. The problem is, as Bertrand Russell pointed out, science is easy. You look at evidence, you make a conclusion. You may debate about the evidence or your conclusion, but the procedure is clear. But very few people use scientific method. And those of us who in academia and in education use scientific method, we only use it for minority of our problem. I don't use scientific method for 90% of the problem I am facing in life, unfortunately. It's very difficult to do. But I think this is important, nevertheless, to have in mind as we go forward into the future. So the lesson I had was income distribution was important. I then showed, and it was more important just looking at the trend of income distribution, because there was this view of the world at the time, which Thatcher and Reagan also implemented in Europe and in the UK and in the US, that somehow if you just let the economy grow, the income distribution will look after itself. This is known as Trickle-Down Hypothesis. The idea was that if you make the rich richer, it trickles down to the poor, and the poor get richer as well. Still, a lot of people believe it. My evidence suggests that that's not true. You really need to look after the underprivileged society and make sure that the benefit of the technology and your wealth, oil wealth or other wealth you have, is spread more evenly. And I think that's one of the problems we have at the moment in the world we live in, that this is being ignored. The second question I had when I was in Iran, remember I'm in Iran, but I'm facing these fundamental questions because I took it seriously, right? The second question I got was when oil price went quadrupled. I was in now become, when they censored my article, they realized who I am. They made me a head of research department of central bank at the age of 25. I was the youngest head of research department. The research department in the Central Bank of Iran was 100 people working for me. It was an amazing opportunity. I had to write the annual report of the whole the country, the economic annual report. And I was involved in many decision making, not actively as a consultant. So one of the issues was that when the oil price went up in 1972-74, it went up 4 times, quadrupled. And it was good for Iran and many oil exporting countries, but also a lot of people suffered, like importing countries. And even the oil exporters were concerned that this huge rise in oil prices may affect the future, reduces the demand for oil in the future. So I remember the Shah of Iran received a letter from King of Saudi Arabia raising this issue, which I think was a consultant from the American consulting company told them that to do that. So when we received the email, the question was sent to me because it was a quantitative question. What is the consequence of rising oil prices on demand? This is a quantitative question to ask, right? It's exactly what econometrics is supposed to do. So it says, what happens if oil price goes up by 30%? How does it affect the demand in the future? So that's the question, right? Then I looked at the data at the time. Remember, we're sitting in 1970, 74. The only data we had was about 10, 12, maybe 20 years of data. But during the period that history of the oil prices, if you look at from 1960, because of OPEC and other development, price of oil in real terms hadn't changed at all. Hardly changed. Before the big rise in 1973, 70, 71, 73. What is interesting was that we couldn't use the data to answer the question. We just couldn't use any particular time series data to answer because there's not enough variation to answer the question. But then I persevered. I said there has to be a way out. And I found out through a work of later on by Robert Pandyke, who was in MIT, who looked at the data from different countries in order to answer the question. What did he do? He looked at 5 countries, UK, US, France, Germany, and Italy. And then when he looked at this data, although the history of oil prices were similar, but they differed a lot from each other. Why? Because of the taxation. America hardly taxed the energy in 1970s, hardly. By France and Germany, they were highly taxed. And the UK and Italy was in between. So what you could use then, I realized that you can use the what we call now cross-sectional variation. In other words, variation of oil prices across countries to compensate for the fact that there were not enough variation of oil prices over time. So that led me to the analysis of panel. Most of my contribution later on in life was actually to use this idea and extend it to other contexts, as I'm going to talk about. So therefore, the question was about what is the effect of a time series question? What is the effect of oil price rising on the demand for energy? But in order to answer it, you have to take advantage of another dimension of the problem, which is taxation of oil. Can you see how the two then connect? Although Pandyke didn't use formal models, but I realized by looking 5 countries, he showed that you can look at the variation across countries in order to do that. Then obviously this insight of using cross-country data could also be across region, across sector of the economy, across industries to augment time series variation, which may be inefficient. So therefore, that has become a major development. And people say, maybe when you do technical work, nobody refers to you. So most theoretical econometricians don't have many citations, but my number of citations is over 125,000 at the moment, Google site. And the reason is because I develop methods that other people use. So basically understanding the nature of the method that I use is because I want to answer a question. I don't develop a method for the sake of it. So I don't develop an abstract method that, somebody may use it. I'm not saying people shouldn't do that. I always enjoyed finding a way of answering a question that is important to many people, and including myself, because I'm always interested in questions, right? So that goes back to the thing. Now, what happened then in Iran now? I haven't come to revolution yet. I better speed up. Now, by everything 75, 76, Iran, everybody thought was great. And the Iranian real was stronger than ever. We had no restriction to travel. We could, without any visa, we could go to UK and all European countries. And the Shah had the view that somehow Iran become the top 10 countries in the world, right? That's what we were. I had to go to military, and the central bank wouldn't let me go to do. All Iranian have to do serve 2 years in conscription. And usually the people who got a PhD, they went and taught universities, and then they went to military 2 summers. They wouldn't let me do that because they needed me, I guess, as a head of research department of central bank. They wouldn't let me go. And then when the governor changed, I thought, God, this is my time. I insisted I want to do my military. The reason was I couldn't travel abroad for my own work. I could only travel on the diplomatic passport. It was an amazing experience. I'm not complaining about it. We were very looked after, but I wasn't a free man. I had to go on a mission. So I meant to go to military. So I went in military for 6 months. And that period was really important because I came across ordinary Iranians. Because I lived in the Ivory Tower. I was in England. I was in Cambridge, all Ivory Tower. Central Bank of Iran is a new institution, was another Ivory Tower. So when I worked with ordinary people who got their degree from all over the country, and they knew I got a PhD and they knew who I am, they brought books to me to read. The books they didn't know. They brought the books from Iqtisad Ma, which is basically Iqtisad Na, which is the Arabic word, book by Sadr. I read Jalaluddin Farsi, all through in the military situation. Then I start realizing the country is not what I thought it is. Then when I left, I had the opportunity to become the Undersecretary of the Minister of Education. And that also gave me another opportunity to go around the country, visiting schools. I went to Azerbaijan in the north. I went to Khuzestan in the south. I visited all parts of the world, of the country. And I realized that there are huge disparities, huge discontent, which wasn't going to be resolved. So now that I predicted the outcome of revolution, I realized the system we were living in is not sustainable. Although I was very privileged, I was then Undersecretary of a ministry, had lots of resources, but I decided that we need to return, and that is why I got my wife was already pregnant on our 3rd child. When the baby was born, I sent them to England, and I followed suit. But I'm also fortunate because this is the second thing I said to all my children. I have 5 of them and 5 grandchildren. I'm blessed that you need to have outside option. When revolution was building up, I was fortunate. Trinity College had offered me a position as the fellow of the college, which was really a privilege anyway, which I turned down because I couldn't go. And they said, okay, you can come back as a fellow of the college anytime the next 4 years. And that gives me the option to go back to academic life without any hesitation. I was fortunate again. I had the outside option. So I'm telling all my children, in life, you always have outside option. You never know what's going to happen. Outside option is not cheap, and it's not easy to come by. It's like any option. Those who do finance, you have to pay for an option. I was fortunate. Maybe I paid for an option because I did the research well, right? And they wanted me. But you need to do something to get this outside option. And that was also very important for my future life. So I could go back to academia. But remember, I was 6 years away from it. Try to be 6 years away from anything and go back to it. It's not easy. It's a big challenge. But it's also a privilege.
If I may interrupt, Professor, I don't know how much time you have. We are so enjoying it. We already have a long
We're
list
going to
of
finish now.
questions.
Then we can have questions.
We are very much enjoying it, but I hope that we have enough time to entertain questions.
Yes, sorry about that. Because of I lost track when we come back and on. So I want to I couldn't hear you very well. I'm just not going to change the settings so that I can hear you. Okay, so anyway, just to cut the story short, when I was fortunate to go back to Cambridge, but because I was away, I also could look at the development over the 6 years I was away from academia in a bit a better light, and that actually helped me to work on looking at some of the issues. One of the main topic was like rational expectation. I wrote a book about the limits to it, and I remember people were very upset about what I did. That was a negative for my academic career, but I didn't mind that. So basically, I use my understanding of my experience in Iran, and when I came back, I basically start from scratch again and developed and built up the Cambridge econometrics. When I was fortunate enough to be asked to go to hedge fund to develop automated trading systems. So 2 years I was outside academia again, but I learned financial markets. Then I trained many students. My most important privilege is to be able to have known these students who have managed to train, and they do better than me in many areas. And I think that is, to me, is the most important value that you have in your education. So all these challenges I faced, and in a way, I'm going to stop now because I wanted to, you can ask questions that I can come back to these issues, but it allowed me, all these questions I'm telling you, the last question which I want to tell you because it's important for, to finish off, is that when I was a consultant to Oliver Wyman, which was another financial company, credit risk company, I was with a group of the consultant visited a bank in Germany. In fact, when I got an honorary degree from Maastricht, the lady who interviewed me said, "You developed this complicated model, it's called the global model, GVAR model. It's like harakiri," you know, the Japanese say, why you did it? And that has actually developed in a major activity, and many people use the ideas. Let me tell you what happened was that then I stopped, went to the bank, and we had a meeting with the bank managers, and they were in Germany, and it was just in a year after the Asian financial crisis, which, as you remember, some of you, it was very important development. And the banks in Germany were very worried. In fact, Turkey also had a financial crisis, and they were worried that they would affect them because they used to lend to Turkey quite a bit. They asked me, how could you model the effect of a big shock, say in Asia or in Latin America or in Middle East, on the bank portfolio in Germany? How could you answer that question? That was a question. Nobody had answered that in a technical, proper, satisfactory way. What I realized, the only way I can answer it is to develop a model for each country in the world, or most countries in the world, and then connect all the countries together, so that if a shock happened in, say, in China, or even in Taiwan, doesn't matter, or in Middle East, how that then affect other countries through the trade. You know, all the things they are doing, like Sanction, which I then worked on, is all through interconnections, either financial interconnection or trade connection. So therefore, if you model the two types of connections, you can actually find how the shocks travel from one country to another, and then they go back. And then that affects the markets in that country, and then affects the banking sector, and then affect the portfolio of the loan that you have constructed. And then you can calculate the risk, which then you have to incur if a bad event happened in Turkey. Quite complex problem. So we did that. The first time it was done was on a spreadsheet. Imagine doing this problem on a spreadsheet. But I got another thing I learned when I worked with foreign agencies. By that I mean, I don't mean foreign, I mean international agencies or banks or other financial institutions. My main condition to work with them in continue is to allow me to publish the result of my work. Usually they don't agree. Amazon asked me to work for them, they wouldn't want, I said no. I worked with the Bank of France and said, we don't release the data, that fantastic data. I said, thank you very much. Because as an academic, I have, if you like, and I hope you all feel the same way, we have a accountability to the society. We need to produce products which helps the masses, not to make us rich or to make some people rich. And I recommend that as well. That's one of the most important things I learned. And that pays off at the end. It may not make you rich, but makes you actually relate better to more people. So people understand your method, understand your logic. So therefore, I took the question of that important question seriously. I developed a model, what they call global model, which interconnect the models that's used in central banks and many other agencies. I'm going to stop on there, and then I will share you with some other photographs to tell you what I look like and when I arrived to Cambridge, but I think we can talk about it later. I should stop now. I'm sorry that I overstepped my time a bit too much. I think the interruption didn't help. Thank you very much.
Oh, not at all, not at all. On behalf of all attendees, I would like to sincerely thank you, Professor Pesaran, for such an inspiring mentoring talk. To all attendees and to people who would watch the video later, Professor Pesaran had kindly autographed his seminal book entitled Time Series and Panel Data Econometrics, and had dedicated to AUB students and community. This book is currently in transit and will be donated to AUB Jafet Library as soon as we receive it early next week. I would like also to take this opportunity to sincerely thank Professor Pesaran's assistant, Mrs. Akiko Matsukiyo, for all her kind assistance to make this mentoring talk happen. I also want to thank Professor Leila Dagher for introducing me to Professor Pesaran. For questions, may I ask all the attendees to enter your questions in the Q&A box. Please indicate where you are coming from, what do you do in life. I'll be reading the questions and Professor Pesaran will be answering. So I'm gonna start with this question from Lean Hijazi, AUB undergraduate student. How did getting nominated for the Nobel Prize change your life, career, research? Also, is it possible that you did not get the Nobel Prize because you are of Iranian origin?
Well, you know, the Nobel Prize, the nomination is not like an Oscar nomination. It's not just, it's not like that. It was actually the Thomson Reuters who issues based on citation. They predict who is going to win the Nobel Prize. I would think of it like not a nomination, it's more a prediction that based on my research. And unfortunately, all these kind of prizes is political. I wouldn't say necessarily that because I was Iranian or not. It could be because the work I did on rational expectations, which I didn't have time to talk about. I wrote a book called The Limits to Rational Expectations. When I came back from Iran, I suddenly realized people are developing this model, what's called rational expectation. Everything. Well, let me tell you what rational expectation means, so you be the judge. The idea is based very simple. It said that agents have to make decisions. Everybody has to make decisions based on the knowledge they have. And these hypotheses assume that all agents know the true model of the world, and they calibrate their decision based on the truth, the true distribution of the world. As an econometrician, I knew that is baloney, right? I knew it's not right. So I set about understanding it and elucidating the limitation of this hypothesis so that people would develop more realistic models for how decisions are made. Everybody now follow what I said. That was written in 1987. The book was published in 87. And in fact, when Angus Newton, who did the Nobel Prize, he did the Nobel Prize later on, I remember a conference in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and I was supposed to meet him for a breakfast. I was supposed to give a major lecture for Economic Society, Jacob Marshall lecture. And he came to me, he said, Hashem, I've seen the book that you are publishing, it was Blackwell, which then became Wiley. The title is Limit Russian. You better go and change the title. This is exactly what he told me. I said, why do I change the title, Angus? He said, if you use this title in your book, you will be blackballed by American academics. I don't know how many of you know what blackballing means. Blackballing is the idea that in most clubs in England, even now, when they have a new member to admit, what they do, they go and vote through a ball which says either you throw a white ball or a black ball. If anybody receive a one black ball, the nomination become rejected. So that it's not the majority. It's not that somehow, if one person is against you, that's it. So basically, unfortunately, academic life is not being Iranian so much. I think it's also because that what you do may upset some people, right? And those people who develop Russian expectation, all of them got a Nobel Prize. Tom Sargent, Lars Hanson. Maybe I hadn't written the book. More likely I would have a Nobel Prize now rather than being Iranian. But it could be both. I think it could be both being Iranian and wrote that book. I'm proud of both, by the way. I would not give it either of them back for any reason.
Very well said. Thank you. This question is from Nader Naufal, biology senior student at AUB. Based on your experience both in the Ministry of Education in Iran and as a professor in many prominent universities, what essential addition do you think should be included in all university economics curricula, course, teaching methods, etc.?
I think what has happened, economics as a subject become much wider in scope. It's very difficult to teach all area of economics. So therefore, what it means that what I would like to have more nowadays is more hand-on, what I call hand-on sessions, hand-on experience with data in laboratories. So like scientists go to lab and learn about some of the phenomena they are interested in. I think we should use more data labs, more in fact, experimental type of approaches as well in economics. Some universities are doing it, but it's too costly, right? It's easy to come and get somebody to give a lecture and then that's it. But to provide facilities for data analysis or opportunity to become intern in some of the professional companies around the city, I think these are the new important things. Some do it better than others, and I think we really need to spend more time connecting students to the workplace and connecting students to the data, because it becomes much easier now. When we used to do data analysis, gosh, that was difficult. I remember I was in Harvard. I used to all work at night because it's the only time as being PhD student, we given computer time, because computer time were only given to us in the middle of the night at 12. I remember 12 midnight till 5 in the morning. The only time we could use computer time. And nowadays, thanks God, your iPhone could be more powerful than the computer I used. And I think this is going to revolutionize eventually the way we educate people and the way we analyze data. I have no doubt about it.
Thank you. This question is from Mary Ann Shaheen, chemistry junior student. You were lucky enough to start your university journey with friends from home. What advice would you give those who moved alone and are looking but struggling to make new friends?
I think that is really important, something I didn't experience. As I mentioned this myself, because I know how important it is to be able to connect to others, especially when you are away from home. Those days, our connection with our home was a letter which we received maybe a month, from one month to another. There was no telephone, no communications whatsoever. So those days was probably more important, more difficult. But now I think finding out people of your own country, people who are in your area, and connect with them. And you need to take more effort, unfortunately. I know it's more difficult. I mean, COVID has been made things even more difficult than ever before. But I think you should not give up on that. Having connection is most important, especially at the earliest stage of your life, because some of those connections remain with you. And I think you should take more effort. Not so much virtual connection through Facebook. I'm a bit skeptical on all of that. Maybe I'm old on this. I'm sure I am. But nevertheless, whatever you're doing with that, you should compensate it by having a real connections, real-time connections, in my view.
Thank you. This question is from Lionel Taif. To what extent was your Iranian origin a hurdle in the advancement of your career?
I think definitely, I'm sure it was, but now I know, but I never noticed it myself at the time. That's what's interesting, is that I didn't feel that I'm discriminated. But as I get older and I saw how people talk in committees and they forget I'm there sometimes nowadays, because they think I'm a part of the system, they forget I'm Iranian. So they say things which I realize that this is discriminatory. I remember going to high table of Trinity College, Cambridge, for dinner. It's called high table. You go for a dinner, and usually you are introduced to guests, not the other fellows. So the fellows bring their guest, you sit next to their guest to have a conversation. And so the guests usually don't know who I am, right? They didn't know I'm a professor or a fellow of the college. They looked at me. I looked young as well those days. Maybe I'll share you with picture when I went back to Cambridge in 1979. I look quite young. So let me just share that, and I explain why they said what they said to me. So let's look at this picture. This is a formal picture was taken when I arrived in Cambridge in 1979 as a fellow. My first, basically the first month as a fellow. So then let me go back. And so basically, what happened that when I sat next to a guest, the conversation always went like this: what are you doing? Why are you here? Right? That's the first question, is why are you here? They look at you, you're a foreigner, they say, why are you here? In Trinity College, sitting on high table, remember a long time ago. Now become more normal. I mean, those days there were not many. Then they would say, and the question always end up, you say, when do you go back? They always told me, basically the idea was you're privileged enough to come to this college, be trained, then go back to your country. That was the attitude it was all the time. And I usually, I was a bit naughty as well. I would never say I was a professor here. I would say, yeah, I'm doing research. I did it on purpose. So I said, I'm doing research, and I usually played it low key. But they always, they didn't really, there was a distinction between the fellow of the college, which accepted me, and the rest of the society, which didn't accept me to be part of the college. In other words, there are two different views of the world. Is one the view of your colleagues, that they work with you, they know you. Another one, the other people. Is the other people, even my wife's family, they said, why should he be allowed to become a professor in Cambridge and a fellow of Trinity College? Because Trinity College was an epic of the establishment. I didn't realize it. It's an establishment, they had spies and they had many Nobel Prizes. I remember the master, our college, which is called the head of our college, often they couldn't make conversation. One of them had a French ambassador to dinner, and they were having a conversation about academic achievement and so on. And then apparently the head of our college told the French ambassador, sir, do you know that we have more Nobel Prize winners in this college than you have in the whole of France? Which is true. So that is the nature of the beast there. So in the sense that a lot of people thought that these foreigners shouldn't be there, if you see what I mean. Right? That's true. That's true. And of course, you get discriminated against. But I think you should not let that bother you, in my view. Never let this bother you. Do not self-censor yourself. Ever. For example, I didn't censor myself because the governor central bank didn't want me to publish things in the income distribution. Right? I did continue the work. I knew that I'd be discriminated, but why should it affect my work? And the point here is that my achievement has been recognized through citation that I get. And that citation is not, nobody can discriminate. It's totally independent measure. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Kaafarani could tell you. Because somebody has to read your work and be interested enough to cite it and get it published, because it's not just somebody writing a paper and citing you. Their paper should also be published. So my recognition came independent of the discrimination, if you see what I mean. There are other ways nowadays that you can be recognized. When I was a student and then academic, there were none of these things. It was all very closed doors. unfortunately. It's much better now, much better, believe me.
Thank you. This question is from Joanne Zghaib. She's also a biology student at AUB. As an Iranian economist, how do you think economic sanctions affected Iran? And how will the West's economic sanctions affect Russia? Will it affect Russia alone, or is it a double-edged sword?
It's a very good question. I recommend, I wrote a bit of technical paper. I actually used newspaper article data to find out the sanction intensity. In order to answer your question, it's a good question, right? So the question was, how do I measure the degree of sanction, right? So basically, if you say, of course, sanction is not the same level at all times. For when Trump increased the maximum pressure sanction on Iran, the degree of sanction against Iran went up a lot. So therefore, the sanction against Iran has been 40 years. And this hasn't been the same level of the sanction. So the first thing we managed to do recently, in recent paper, is available, I can send it to you. So basically, we measured the degree of sanction through outside measures. And then when I analyzed it, you find that the effect of the sanction often is most at the earlier stage of the sanction. So when Trump imposed a huge amount of sanction on Iran, withdraw from the agreement, nuclear agreement, as some of you remember, unilaterally withdraw. There was an agreement. Iran said, "Okay, we have no sanction. Let's move on." But then they didn't allow that to happen. Iran faced a sanction. The exchange rate, as happened now in Russia, collapsed. Exactly what happened in Russia. We saw that 2 weeks ago. And then the inflation started to rise, as was happening in Russia. So these are the initial effect of the sanction is the exchange rate depreciation, sometimes what we call overshooting. So exchange rate depreciate even more than what it should to begin with. Inflation starts to rise because the connection of the economy to the rest of the world become misaligned. So you cannot trade with the people you used to trade. You cannot exchange financial, if you like, transaction with the people used to. So you have to substitute those, if you like, trade patterns, those exchange patterns with other methods. It takes time. And then also it depends what the individual member of the society deal with. Remember, the sanction doesn't affect only the government, it affects the people. And that's what people misunderstand, that the people do take action. Iranians have been very innovative. They use the internet much better. They develop their own, for example, when there was a sanction, you cannot have Uber. Uber is what is in America for the cars, right? I don't know what you have in Beirut. Iranians developed their own version of Uber because there's sanction. Amazon cannot operate in Iran. They developed Digicala. In fact, the people who were educated in America, some of them I know, in Stanford, in Berkeley, and MIT, Iranian who were educated, they went actually develop these methods and techniques for Iranian inside Iran. So resilience came from people, but it takes time. So the sanction initially has huge impact, but if it doesn't deliver the political end of the sanction, then the sanction become a part of the society. It's not a good idea. It's inefficient. It reduces the growth, for sure. I calculated Iranian growth could have been 1.5% more per annum than it would have been if there were no sanction. But it doesn't mean the economy collapses. That's a mistake many people make. I tell people, give me an example where the long period of sanction has changed political will of a nation. The only one I know is South Africa. And South Africa is because they were a minority regime dominating the majority. It's not like Iran. South Africa is not the same as Iran. It's not the same as Russia. I'm not defending what the Russians are doing. It's abhorrent to me to a nation invade a country, right? I mean, we could be one of them, right? Iran could be invaded. Iran was invaded by Czarist Russia a number of times. But nevertheless, as an economist, I realized the sanction, it could be a blunt instrument. Now, going back to the issue of whether it's a two-way edge. It is a two-way edge if the country you sanction is big enough. And that country is not isolated. So basically, like have connection with China, connection with India. Iran had no connection. When the UN sanctions were imposed against Iran during Obama period, Obama was much more clever than Trump. It mobilized the whole United Nations against Iran. Trump went against the United Nations, right? So I knew that Trump would not work. But Obama did work, brought Iranian to negotiating table in that way, because they used United Nations. I remember went to India. I gave a major talk to Indian Federal Reserve Bank, and I knew the governor. He's a very nice guy. He's now a professor in Chicago. And I asked him that what happened to sanction with Iran when the oil, because Iran sell oil to India. In fact, at the time, India had $7 billion of Iranian oil money, but couldn't give it to Iran because of UN sanction. So then when you have a UN sanction, it's much more dramatic than when you have a few countries, even being America and Europe, sanctioning Russia. It depends what Indians do, what Chinese do, what Iranians do, and what all other countries do. We trade with, had trade with Russia, and to what extent they would really continue with the sanction. So there is you are correct, but the key result I found that the sanction only works if it's done very quickly and there are some reason for the regime to change their views. But if it doesn't happen, the sanction hurt the people, hurt the regime, obviously, hurt the people, and the regime usually don't change their views, unfortunately. That's my experience. But on the other hand, when I tell this to people, I've said that for 40 years, that the sanction actually has enabled the Iranian regime to continue, rather than the reverse, if you ask me. Because if the sanction weren't there, the Iranian economy would open up, the country would then say, okay, we have connection with the rest of the world, right? So basically, sanction is really an instrument that they use for domestic public consumption. For example, at the moment, if America cannot go and defend Ukraine, but putting soldiers in the theater of the war, right? What else could they do? Do nothing? They do sanction. So therefore, it seems the sanction is something you have to do because you have nothing else you can do. Like, for example, they sanctioned Iran, they couldn't invade Iran. In fact, in my view, Iraq was invaded because it makes sense to invade Iraq, if you think about it. Because they thought by having Afghanistan under their control and having Iraq under their control, they underestimated the Shia in the south of Iraq, right? And then Iran would topple down. So the neocon argument for sanction and the war with Iraq was to basically change the regime in Iran, in my opinion, because otherwise it didn't make sense. Didn't happen. When that didn't happen, I realized the regime is going to continue. There's no doubt about it. And my calculation has been, I've written a lot about this, and I always believe sanction would be a blunt instrument against Iran.
Thank you. Can we have 10 more minutes with questions?
Sure, of course.
Thank you so much. This question is from Lina Hajj Diab, studying nutrition at AUB. Would you change anything from your journey if you have the ability to go back in time?
Wow. I try to answer it, but let me tell you something about the mathematics of this question. Think about that. At any moment of time, you make a decision, right? Imagine the decision you make very simple. You only two choices, right? Of course, in real life, we don't have two choices. We often have more than two choices, right? Imagine if you choose A or a B, but then if you choose A, then there is another A and a B for a branch of A. For each node of that, you have another one. So the number of possibilities that even make one choice different that could result is so humongous. Now nobody can possibly say what would have happened. I couldn't, right? Because I don't know what would have happened if I made that choice. I can tell you an example, but I don't know what would have happened, right? It doesn't, therefore, if you ask me, in the, what I call, when in ignorance, basically the best thing is say nothing. It's better not to say anything when you cannot make any rational analysis. I know that rationality is not the way we live it, but the only way we can think is rational. See, my act may be irrational, I may have no knowledge, but my thinking has to be rational. So therefore, I cannot tell you what would I change in my past, because I don't know whether that change, what would it lead to? Because, you know, there is a Iranian tell us when we say chess, you know, we think either Iran invented the chess or India, and there's a debate, right? In that part of the chess was basically invented. But the person who invented the chess, the story goes that the sovereign asked him, or her, I don't know, maybe it was a lady who invented the chess, that what do you want as reward? He said, okay, you put 1 grain on the first square, then the 2 grain on the second square, 2 to power 2 grain on the third square, 2 to power 3 grain on the fourth square, and carry on, and then give me the grain in the whole that 64 864 square, which is on the chessboard. Try to calculate it. It is humongous amount, right? And this 2 to power p or 2 to power k, as a mathematician, some of you know, this is the simplest model of choice. Every time you choose one or another, that becomes the number of possibilities you have. So therefore, if you're making 100 decisions in your life, and each of the decisions are between A and a B, you get 2 to power 100 possibilities. Is outside anybody's realm of computations, even if you use the most powerful computer to figure out what happens. However, having said that, if I were go back to my own life, one thing I would change is definitely I would not go to the become in the education, undergraduate education, because I thought it was a waste for me and for the country. I should have, in fact, they wanted me to go, wanted me to go back to the plan organization and central bank, but the minister of education wouldn't let me leave. That was the problem. So when you make a decision in a civil servant, you know how it is. You are the slave of the master at the time till something happens. You can't do it. So I would have not gone. But remember, I finished the military, and I was very unsure what's going to happen to me. And therefore, when I was offered this position, which I thought, God, give me a stability, I went for it. So my recommendation, therefore, is not that what I can tell you what would have changed my life. I don't know what would have happened. Maybe nothing would have changed as much. Revolution would have happened, right? Just because I make a different decision doesn't mean revolution would have happened, right? So obviously that's the case. So, however, one thing I learned is that please do not rush making a decision. At any moment in time, what we say, sleep over it. When you make big decisions, it's better to be calmer, more measured, and don't allow emotion to control you so much. It's easy said than done, because when you are young, it's very difficult to control your emotion. I know that. But I think you can't change things, but you can do a better as at the time that you're making a decision.
Thank you. There are many questions, so I'm selecting some that will add to the will cover different aspects of your career and mentoring for the attendees. This question is from Mia Aboud. Nowadays, cryptocurrencies, namely Bitcoin, are trending on the market. What do you think about the use of reliability of such currencies, and how do you envision their future?
This is a difficult question for me because I've been thinking about it and I haven't arrived at a conclusion. I think if you go back to the sanction question, I actually first time, one of the important features of the sanction against Russia, against Iran, which is related to this cryptocurrency, is that they sanctioned Central Bank of Iran. When the Central Bank of Iran was sanctioned, the first central bank to be sanctioned in the world was Central Bank of Iran. A reporter from Wall Street Journal sent me an email when I was sitting in Cambridge, sent an email and said, can I talk to you about it? I thought, what can I do? And he asked me, don't you think that is not a good decision by America? What he was telling me, which I agreed with him, that if a central bank is sanctioned, basically means that the government of a country cannot use their resources and their reserves and connect to manage the activities of the country financially. And if there are other countries like China and now Russia and then it was Venezuela. Any country which America doesn't like, they could sanction. So therefore, all countries which they think in the future they may be sanctioned by America, they try to find alternative system of currency system. And I think cryptocurrency or a version of it could present an alternative to dollar. Now, if the sanction issue wasn't in place, I would say cryptocurrency would be all for money laundering. The value of it is for money laundering or hiding from taxation and that sort of thing, because I don't see what the value of it is in terms of in relation to dollar. But if you think about countries who are likely to be sanctioned by US, think about a lot of people who want to hide their activities from US, therefore they don't want to deal in dollars. It's possible that cryptocurrency could become a substitute. At the time, I thought China could produce an alternative reserve currency to dollar. Now, then I realized China wasn't able to do it and still is not able to do it because not open society. In order to have a reserve currency, you need to have a bond market. And the bond market has to be long-term bond. In other words, people should be able to trust the paper you issue, that they can hold it for 10 years and they are sure that you get back the money. That's what the American government provide that for you. That's what the power of the dollar is, that you can buy 10-year bond and you know what return they give you and when you get it back. Is there such a bond issued by China, by Iran, by Russia, or by India? No. That is a vacuum. I wrote an article about this. It was published also in Financial Times many years ago. That this is an imbalanced nature of the world we live in. This is one of the major imbalances in the world economy, financial system that we have. However, the more you have this sanctioning, the more you have this power of US being exercised, right? The power is good. If you exercise it too much, you may lose the power, right? It's likely to generate alternatives, and the cryptocurrency could be one of them. So imagine Iran and Russia and China, and they agree to hold one of the cryptocurrencies and transact in that cryptocurrency. Imagine, they all agree together. They could do it. They could bypass the dollar in a main way. So therefore, cryptocurrency is becoming a much bigger role, in my view, to play in the long run, although initially I thought it is a minor role. But because of the sanction, because of all, the more you sanction other countries, central bank, the more likely they form a group together and find an alternative.
Thank you. Two more questions, I promise. This question is from Lara Swade. In your educated opinion, can you suggest some ways you think can help Lebanon recover from its economic crisis?
Well, my knowledge of Lebanon economy is not that much, unfortunately. I know about the financial problem you have. Some of them are political problems that there is not agreement of a consensus. I tell you a little bit about my experience when I was in the World Bank advisor. I was fortunate for 6 years. I was advisor to the World Bank Council for the Middle East, as was pointed out by Dr. Kaafarani. And that was very important because it allowed me to communicate not economics, but with academics, but also professional economists, government agencies. I went to Damascus before the war. We didn't have a Lebanon, many times in Cairo, in Morocco, and all these places. So I went 6 years, we used to meet twice a year. One thing I learned that was so important for the development of Middle East economy is this learning about taking turns. It sounds simple. You know, when children fight over a toy or fight over which film they go, we tell them take turns, right? And taking turn means that you let one group of people to rule your country, but you don't kill them because they're ruling, or you don't. The rulers don't kill those people who are being ruled. Basically, they agree. My view is that this is the key element of any economic development which could be sustainable: to have a consensus in a society that there are different rulers going to be in charge, but they take turns, and during their turn, they're allowed to do their policy that the people have voted for them. democracy is not this mystical way that people present about the liberty and all of the things that the Western democracy would pose. But the most important element of democracy that we in the Middle East can use is this education of having taken turns. Because if you do that, then you have a period of economic development, a period in which that ideas can be tested. And then people, if they don't agree with it, they can replace you by some other group. I think this is one key element. But the other key element, the connection of trade with the rest of the region that you are considering. Regional trade is important. And that is, the refugee problem has been a handicap. The problem of the finance you have, the problem of the governance you have, to me, they are more important than coming with a magic economic answer. I think the problem more fundamental is that because of the region, because of the governance, and because of the refugee problems, all of this has hampered a sustainable policy in Beirut, in Lebanon. You know, in a sense, if you think about it, you are very educated people, more than any other one in the Middle East, in any measure you look at. So you have all the ingredient of success. You need this way of putting this ingredient together. You need leadership. You need consensus. You need political awareness. And you need to live within the region as much as possible, in my view. So that is my humble opinion from outside. I have no way of course, if you do all of that, then you become more confident. Other people invest, and then we have what we call multiplier effect. So don't underestimate that. So you have to start from somewhere, but then the multiplier effect would take care of the rest for you, in my opinion. But you are, in my view, you have such a bright future ahead of you if some of these elements are in place, because you have a talent. Your geographic location is amazing. When the reason I came through Beirut and go to Cairo was we realized in Iran that London was the one financial center, Beirut becoming a major financial center. We wanted to have Tehran the financial center. So that would be connection between London, Beirut, Tehran, and Hong Kong, and Tokyo. Your time zone is amazing. So you would be amazing financial center, right? And that's not hasn't happened because of the war, because of the civil war, and all the other things we know. But as far as your location concerned, your history of trade, your history of finance, and your happy trading, you're one of the only countries that the Christians, the Shiites, the Sunni live together in harmony. You know, people have done studies how people could trade in different law. You could have a trade in Lebanon, either you could decide use with the Christian laws or the Muslim laws. You managed to do that. You should be proud of it. You need to bring that back, in my opinion.
The last question for today's beautiful mentoring talk. What is one method you think can help increase job opportunities, especially in countries that are experiencing an economic recession?
I think the key in the creation of job in manufacturing, unfortunately, still, although manufacturing become a small part of many economies, it's only 13% or 20% of many major industrial economies. Service sector become much more important. But unless you have manufacturing so that you can develop skills that then if you need some new product made, you can produce it, it would not be, the linkages in the economy would not be right. That's important. So therefore, but creating manufacturing jobs is not easy. It's easier said than done. Job creation has to come from within, from the demand of the people and the export demand. But there are obviously, if you have a small market like you have, say in Lebanon, you have to rely on the neighboring countries to develop your industries. That's why I was focusing on that. So therefore, it depends. The answer to the question depends on how big your economy is. Where are you located? You're not China. You're not Russia. Iran still is a large country. It's 84 million people, right? So there was in terms there is a big market there. That's why. But if you have a small market, you have more interconnection. Let me give you an example that I learned when I was a student from James Mead, who was another Nobel Prize winner, working on international trade. We were talking about how important trade is in countries. The example was Belgium. Belgium, the trade GDP is larger than GDP. You say, how could it happen? Because what they did, they brought the goods in, they changed it, they sold it. I think Lebanon or countries which are small in the region could act as a kind of like a Belgium in the big European economies. So you need to understand go back to my point, interconnections. Trade is about interconnection. The more interconnection you have, the more you have power of manufacturing, the more you're able to leverage on it. Leveraging is most important in life because how could anybody have millions of dollars? Like, for example, it's impossible without leverage. What is the leverage of Apple? Everybody hold the Apple. You produce one, millions of people are holding. That's leverage. So you need your country to take advantage of a leverage of your economy. Like you produce great wine. How could you leverage on it? You know what I mean? You have music. So every country has to decide, and that comes from you young people, not so much from the government. It comes from the people, but the government should allow you to do it, should provide the safe environment that you know that if you invest and you are enterprising, it pays off. That is why the government is still very important. But nevertheless, it comes from the people. It doesn't come from the government. The source of wealth are the people. But it's the duty of the government to produce the environment within which the people can operate and be safe and also have a confidence and conviction that the fruit of their investment would not be wasted.
Thank you so much. On behalf of all attendees, I would like to sincerely thank you for this inspiring mentoring talk, for answering all of these questions. And I know how busy you are. I very much appreciate your time. I look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully here at AUB. And thank you again. And to all our attendees, thank you so much for attending until our next mentoring talk. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much again. I'd very love to come and visit you.
I would love to host you.
Thank you.
You have a great day. It's at the beginning of the day in California over there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night, everybody.